Let's do
On
it.
it.
Let's get started.
On it.
Well, hello and welcome everybody to the 4 steps to a coaching conversation. Let's get right into it. We've got so much to cover today with some extraordinarily talented people, starting with Raina Fryer, who's our senior director here at Titus of all things. I'm not saying HR. We're saying people and learning.
Good. All things people and learning. Thank you, Mike, which does include HR as a matter of fact. So I'm really happy to be here today to talk to all of you about coaching, what an important thing for all of us to be good at. And it is a major piece of the role that I play here at Titus. About 20 people that I coach consistently here at Titus. It's one of my greatest passions. So here I am today, all things people and learning, to cover HR as well as learning and development internally. That's what I do here.
Well, I'm glad it's one of your passions because it's certainly one of your obvious strengths, because we would be fairly lost without you here, Raina. And speaking of being lost without, Chris Paris, one of our senior directors on our talent acquisition side of the house, who is definitely somebody I look up to in terms of his ability to coach and communicate and just having that courageous candor. But Chris, introduce yourself.
Well, I appreciate that, Mike. It's certainly a mutual feeling there for everybody on this call. So I've been in leadership and coaching for 20 years now. So this is definitely a big passion of mine as well. So I oversee operations for 23 people at Titus. So I'm excited to, speak about, what goes into that and learnings and failures, more importantly. So this is a great topic.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And my name is Mike Kinsey. I'm our regional vice president here at Titus as well. I'm part of the talent optimization side, which is a really fancy word and fancy title for just making sure that I'm helping develop and coach individuals more outside of our business. So obviously, Chris and Raina handling a lot of the internal needs of the people, but coaching, development, onboarding, behavioral assessments, everything is all rolled within talent optimization that my team and I oversee. And so excited to have this conversation. Let's just do a quick recap of what we've covered before in previous webinars that you can still certainly check out. But coaching is helping others identify, set, and meet their own goals. If we look specifically to what those are, we're looking at career development, well-being, problem solving, time management, all those different nuances that we want people, instead of seeing themselves as managers, to put their coaching hat on, because that's going to be critical in how we have these sorts of communications with individuals and those conversations that we have. So moving on, a couple of statistics that we've covered before, I think these are still extremely relevant for us to be able to look at, is coaching cultures create more resilient employees. Look at the impact that this has when you create that culture, or that day-to-day or week-to-week coaching is part of your lifeblood within your company. Is it increases people's intent to stay. So retention, engagement, productivity, all of those areas are pivotal. So let's talk about what it is that coaching actually is and what the impact will be. So if we move on, let's go to just the overall purpose of this time together here today. Is we want to move from this cycle, the classic cycle of fixing problems. I know my wife would attest to that. I'm the one that doesn't always listen very well. I'm the one that wants to fix the problems. Well, that's not always the most helpful thing, and often it isn't. The goal is to actually develop your people and be a support for your people. So the 4 steps of conducting the ideal coaching conversation are as follows. If we move on to the next. So number 1, we look at the vision of where you want to be. So when you look at the direct report, how do they envision themselves in the perfect world? Because then you can go on to the reality of where is it that you are now? Where exactly do they stand? Because now we can actually set some goals and let's hold them accountable for those goals in order to get to that ideal self that they've outlined, that you outlined together. And then ultimately, what are the resources and the barriers that could help or hurt them in that quest to being their ideal self? So let's move on to the next slide, where it has the classic stock image of a person on a mountain. But I assure you, this is intentional, right, Raina? So we've got the picture of where that person is looking to go. We look at leadership as this mountain. When we look at kind of the symbolism of this, and you look at your direct report on that mountain, they may be looking up and they're looking forward to that view from the top. But ultimately, sometimes they don't know how to get there. They don't know we don't even know if they have the skill set to get up that mountain. And they're definitely looking to us to explain how to do it, but also what's on the other side of the mountain for them. And so ultimately, I think the question is how do we help them cast that vision and get them thinking outside of the box when maybe they don't even have the experience or skill set in that space?
And I think that's the place that we really want to spend a lot of time with someone who's interested in coaching is helping them establish their vision, because a lot of our employees are kind of exploring who they want to be when they grow up. I know I'm still exploring who I want to be when I grow up. And so we want to spend the time here talking about maybe a 5-year vision, sometimes further out than that, to truly explore the baby steps that it takes to grow skills to get to that space. So for me, this starts with the conversation, the curious conversation, the asking of questions. So when somebody who's maybe in their first seat ever, fresh out of school, says, I want to be the CEO, we need to talk about what does it mean to get there and really break that down into these digestible pieces. So vision casting is great. We just have to set reality into the vision casting.
How often is it that people come in and they're off in terms of their perception of where they want to go and maybe how long it's going to take, especially now with the newer generation coming into the workforce? What are you seeing there?
Well, I feel like I don't know that I can say there's a percentage, right, in terms of how many times people come in and they're completely off. I do think in a coaching relationship, there has to be a level set in a sense of self-awareness, because I think that's the biggest part when we're not moving on to step 2 yet, but part of that is really helping them see the reality of where they're sitting today. And that's establishing that gap piece. So I think a lot of times we're all excited. You have these people who are really driven to get somewhere fast, and we just have to level set their expectations. And it also has to be level set against the organization. If a person's looking to grow here at Titus, we may not have the seat that they want tomorrow or the next day. So sometimes it's just really saying like, let's help you develop skills in your current seat. Let's help you master in your current seat, knowing that those skills can transfer to something bigger in the future.
Right.
Can I add something to that, Mike? So yeah. I'm going to back up just a little bit to go forward. Okay. So you had put up some stats at the beginning, some stats that I think are really interesting to know. And these aren't 100%. I saw these recently. Last year, American businesses spent $100 billion on recruiting. Okay. Of that, $5 billion was spent on training and development of their current team. So just think about that. Like, we're replacing a lot of people, but we're not spending a lot of energy on the development of the team. So I think everything that Raina just said makes sense. If you're not doing it at a high level right now, though, that might sound really daunting, but just know that neither is 95% of the workforce. Mm-hmm. So even just going into it and then just starting that development conversation, the way that Raina laid that out, you're already top 5% leader in America just by starting that.
And Chris, it's interesting because I had a good friend of mine sit on the last conversation we had about coaching. And he even said, it's interesting to me that people still need help in this arena. It seems like something we should all know and all be doing. But to your point, Chris, I think we know we should be doing it. There's a lot of time invested in doing it, and more importantly, doing it well. So that's why today's conversation, I think, is so important, is giving people the very easy 4-step process to creating this coaching culture.
Absolutely. And the final point that I'll make before you go on, Mike, is I think it's because a lot of people have this idea in their head that going into it, it has to be really polished, and it has to be already conceived of what it's going to be, when really it doesn't. It's so much of just a conversation between you and that direct report or whoever it is that you're giving coaching to, that it's not about showing up and presenting them their development. It's just an ongoing journey and discussion as to what it actually is.
Yeah, something that's been coming up more recently from a client perspective is there is a large group of individuals who are actually really happy with where they are in their career, right? And so casting a vision might seem very different for people who are a bit more content or want to be in their role and grow for a certain amount of time. Chris, I'd throw this to you, just managing the size of the team that you have, is how do you keep someone happy and motivated and creating a different experience when that vision is maybe a bit more simplistic?
Yeah, I think one thing I'm really cognizant of, especially the last couple of years, just using my own experience at Titus, we've grown a lot, and the vision is, we have a lot further to go, and I'm very conscientious of thinking about the person that you're talking about that isn't necessarily, looking to become Raina someday or Mike Kinsey, right? So I like to just every once in a while make sure that people understand that we do need two types of people within this organization. We need the people that want to continue to grow within that, but also we need people that are really happy with what they do, and they're just subject matter experts that are really good at their job, and they can influence, those around them. So I think it's about finding out what people are passionate about, and then caring about those things for your people. Because I think if you want to show the highest level of care to somebody, like, care about what they care about. So how do you put that within their own development? So maybe they're not getting a new title change, but you can still grow them and stretch them, within their current role.
Yeah, and to that point, coaching isn't about helping someone promote necessarily. And so I think that in our minds, we're always like, oh, well, everybody wants a new title, everybody wants to promote. And that's just not simply the case. So coaching is about bettering people's skill sets, and whether that means to stay in the seat that they're in and be incredibly good at that seat, to Chris's point, the subject matter expert. For others, it is reaching for the next thing, or to a department to the right or to the left, something they want to explore and stretch into. That's
really good, because you eventually run out of titles, don't you? Right? There's a lot of people and only a finite amount of titles. And something that I thought was a really interesting exercise that we've implemented is asking people not only where do you want to go professionally, but what do you want to experience during your time within this role? Is it more travel opportunities and getting on site with clients? Is it learning a new skill set, public speaking or presenting, that you've always wanted to do or could be beneficial in future roles? Being able to pour into somebody and helping them cast that vision for what could be within that function is really, really big.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Mike. Something that's really important within what you just said is that I think it's often a fallacy. I'm overgeneralizing when I say this, but I think a lot of people think that, influence and impact is title driven. And while it can be, realistically, more of the time, it can happen from any level within the organization. You can make a really big impact and not be in the, top tier of leadership within the company. So I think making sure that people understand that'll really, bring some great stuff out of these conversations.
Yeah, impact and leadership are characteristics. They're not titles.
Yep.
Agreed. Well, let's shift that now. So if we go from vision to reality, where is it that you are right now? This takes quite a level of self-awareness, right? There's a big piece that I think pride and ego can get in the way, I know, with all of us in certain areas. And I think we look at ourselves maybe through a more positive or more negative lens, depending on the individual. And so what we need to do is really help paint a picture based on objective information of where we see an individual's potential and skill sets and natural behaviors. And so the first question that comes to mind is, how much talking versus listening do you generally use in this conversation when it comes to reality, Chris, and bringing that to your direct reports?
Wow. I mean, that it varies, but let me give you a specific example. Because like really what you need to do in the role you're in is just fail as quickly as possible. Right? And so that always sounds counterintuitive, but anybody that ever, continued to rise within your industry, they failed forward. Nobody ever got up on a stage and said, wow, no problems. This was really smooth. So when I'm talking to somebody who is interested in moving ahead, but maybe they're not necessarily ready, we really lean into the failures, the learnings that they need to experience, so that when they get to that next level, it's not about being able to necessarily handle it as an individual themselves. It's about how do you teach it? How do you guide others through it when they go through those things? So on my team, I kind of have this. I get made fun of for having a personality like Ted Lasso, because people will go through a problem. Or
Chris, did you say a personality like Ted Lasso? Because I think we've said you are Ted Lasso.
Well, all right. I'll let you say that. But the first thing I'll come to them with is positivity. It's like Mike comes to me, oh man, I'm going through this challenging thing. I'm like, oh, isn't it great? And they're like, what do you mean, isn't it great? Because you need to go through this stuff. If you didn't learn this now, you couldn't teach it later. So I think a really good leader also isn't just positioning themselves to be somebody on a pedestal that everybody should look up to. It's just showing that you're the person in the arena. You have these scars. This is why you're here. And they need to kind of go through that too. And everybody's timeline is different. So how you handle that, how much you talk versus how much you ask, I think it really just depends on the personality of the person and just where they're at in their career at that point.
This is typically the hardest stage for the coach themselves, because sometimes you are having a difficult conversation. If the self-awareness isn't there, you're helping create the awareness, and hopefully you're doing that through asking the right questions and being curious. But this is a space where a coach might have to say, well, let's talk about where you are, to Chris's point, currently failing, so that we can move past that, grow you in that area so that you can reach for the next thing. So this is really the stage where we have to say, okay, this is what you said you wanted. This is where you really are as a baseline. And we have to then help create that plan for them to move through that to get to the next level.
I love all the conversation around failure and failing forward, as strange as it sounds. I always try to tell my team, fail means first attempt in learning. Right? We're making an investment in you to fail in order for us to learn and to grow as continued education and an experience, because that's what we need to help grow and develop the organization. And so as you're going about preparing for this conversation, Raina, what are some questions or tools that you leverage as you prepare for a conversation about reality?
Yeah, this gets really hard for organizations if you're not currently using a competency model. So let me talk a little bit about what we've done internally. We do have a competency model, and our competencies are based from Korn Ferry's model. So there are 38 competencies that we focus on in the organization, and each seat in the company has a set of these competencies. So sometimes the easiest way to go into these conversations is for the individual who wants the coaching to self-assess against the set of competencies that are in their seat, and for their manager to also do an assessment. And then you come together and compare and contrast where the individual is like, I think I'm strong here, and I think I have the greatest opportunity on this side, and see if there's alignment between the manager and the employee. Depending on if that manager is also the coach, then they can immediately go into that conversation. If the coach is somebody outside coming in, like in a lot of situations, I'll coach people who I don't manage. I need that information to flow up to me, and then I can use that information to help build a coaching plan for the individual. So I love using something established because it creates clarity. If you don't have a competency model, then it's going to be a more free-for-all conversation about skill. So you might just ask generally, where do you think you're really strong? And where do you think you have the greatest opportunity to grow? So you can do it with or without an established model. I think the model makes it easier.
Right. And what we find is when somebody doesn't have an established model, it's important that at the very least you outline the skills, the value alignment, and the behaviors that are necessary within that seat that we have determined to make someone successful, to make sure that those skills are all attached to performance objectives that the individual needs to achieve within that function. So now we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go to goals, right? So when we close the gap from vision and reality, we start talking about the goals and making sure that we're creating that vision of what that person needs to do and achieve. So I would take a quick step back in this too. And when I talk about the behaviors that we're looking for, again, I believe that the goal is to always be a cultural addition to a team, but a value fit. So your company needs to have those defined values and the behaviors that are necessary. I know we use behavioral and cognitive assessments. We use the predictive index in this. And what's really helpful is it allows me to know how to have a conversation like this with direct reports, because people are going to take things very differently. And you can be maybe more or less assertive in the way that you communicate this, or how much risk you need to take on when it comes to having those conversations. So Chris, I'd ask you, I know you've used a variety of tools in management. How have those benefited you in having conversations around specific achievable goals?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're always good as guidelines to kind of, make sure that you're stayed focused on the right things. I think I would take this in a slightly different direction, because I think sometimes, at least I made this mistake when you're talking about even just the creation of goals, right? Earlier on in my career, I really felt like I needed to show up and just have those created for my team, or I had to have a lot of this premeditated. And now I've kind of learned that, well, at the end of the day, no one says no to their own goals. So I really need them to be passionate about them. And then the other thing is I'm an achiever. So every time a question is posed to me, I want to answer it and I want to win. But what I've learned is when I get them to guide them towards, creating the right goals, it's also asking, what about that is important to you, right? Because I think that gets you to kind of the thing underneath the thing. And then you might actually find what the real goal is once you ask those questions. I think the most important thing from goals that I've learned is that they have to be measurable and they have to be attainable in the short term, yet they are a step in the right direction to the long-term vision. So as long as those things are happening, I know I said a lot that's in there, but I think it's good to have, is this a step in the journey to what we're trying to do big picture? At the same point, can we achieve this in the short term? And if not, do we need to kind of reimagine what these goals look like? Just get us back on track.
Right.
And tied to Chris's statement on just making sure things are attainable and they're realistic when we're working with the employee to create the goals, is just really ensuring that we're not putting too much development on a person at any one time. So I think when we're looking to bring people's abilities up, the rule of thumb for me in coaching is never more than 2 to 3 skills that we're working on at any one time. And that between coaching sessions, there's enough time between where people can actually work on the skills, apply it, work on takeaway or action items, so that you come back having a more robust conversation. Because change and growing our skills and changing behaviors takes a lot of time. So we want to simplify it. Don't bite off more than we can chew at any one time. And typically when you're working on skills, there's kind of an end game to it. So as we're working to close this gap, this is probably not a 4-year conversation. We're working on segments of skill and growth. And then we move on to the next segment of skill and growth. So coaching is meant to be short-term skill development that leads to the next short-term skill development, hopefully in the long run, creating closing that gap to reality.
And just on top of that, to help people like stay focused and to guide them, again, not to tell them, when you can tell that they're putting too much, into it. So a lot of times there'll be too many action items, too many things that they're committing to. I really like to use the Pareto principle. So instead of telling them, hey, you should do this, it's the 80-20 rule, right? So typically, even within that goal, like what's the top 20% that if you did that out of all that was on here, it would put you that much closer to your ultimate goal. And that kind of helps people. People are really smart and they don't need you to tell them the answer. They just need to help them think a little bit. And in our fast moving society, I think we don't have enough time on our calendars where we're really critically thinking and strategizing. So you might have to help them create that space, even in that coaching conversation.
I'd love to ask this question to both of you and get your perspective on this, but how important do you feel like KPIs or key performance indicators are in the goal setting standpoint? Do you keep it a bit more high level with what's the outcome, or how much do you invest in the day-to-day activities that they need to accomplish?
I feel like for me, KPIs are really important, almost in a sense, management. So we're talking here about coaching, and management isn't a dirty word. We have to manage and coach our people. For me, KPIs become even more important when we're managing an individual, and less important to me when I'm coaching an individual, because I do feel like coaching conversations are more fluid and they can go in a lot of different directions. So I don't want to be too attached to something so specific. Versus if I'm embedding this in more in a management. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
I feel sometimes KPIs are just too specific for how a coaching conversation can go.
Yeah, I think it depends. There's not a one size fits all answer to this. I think at the end of the day, though, winning teams, keep score, right? So if you can tell that you're living in this kind of philosophical rhetoric when in this conversation, you got to bring it down a little bit. And then if people aren't measuring themselves by something, at least on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, I think that's where you can kind of get into trouble sometimes if you don't have the right personality, because it can be really easy, to get off track. So I agree. I don't think you have to, have a KPI for every single thing, but it's got to be enough where it's clear that you have that guiding light, right? Like that lighthouse on the rock that's keeping them away from danger of not attaining their goal.
And at Titus, Mike, we measure a lot of different things. And I think when we look at measuring behavior or skill set, it can feel a little bit more qualitative in nature. I mean, measuring somebody's success through the process of coaching could be as simple as revisiting the original conversation of where was I, or where am I, where do I want to go, and how much closer to the goal I was. So in a sense, it is a measurement. Just maybe it's not as specific as like a performance objective might be related to their seat or that kind of goal they're trying to accomplish from a business outcome perspective.
Well, and to piggyback off of that, again, going back to one of the first things I said, it's taking the pressure off that this is just like a finalized thing. This isn't like a checklist. This isn't hey, I submit this to HR and then we'll look at it at the end of the year. This is a living, breathing thing that's helping somebody. It's a conversation. Mm-hmm. So sometimes the KPIs need to change. Hey, I had 5 KPIs and after a month, we're clearly seeing 3 of them really didn't help us get to our ultimate goal. We might have to reimagine this. Again, it's an ongoing conversation and not just something you're looking at like once or twice a year.
Yeah, my brain does a lot better with sports analogies than anything else. And so when I think of this is, if you're learning a sport for the first time, what's the thing that you want to know? I want to know how to win the game. Like, how do you win? Okay, you score the most points, or whatever the situation may be. There's a lot of different ways to get there, whether it's sports or a board game. I want to know how to win. And so there's a lot of different strategies to get you to the same way. And so from what I'm hearing from you two, it's what are the strategies that we can create together, maybe focusing on specific strengths based on what we just talked about before, the goals of reality of how we can help them win that game. So moving forward, if we go to the resources and barriers, this is a really key piece, because helping somebody overcome these roadblocks, this is a place where I can sometimes struggle as a leader, because, and I think all of us can share this sentiment that we care deeply about the people. When we manage a person, we're managing their livelihood, their family, their friends, right? There's a lot of different responsibilities that falls onto our shoulders in this way. So what are, I mean, both Raina and Chris, what are some common barriers that you've helped people overcome that have allowed for them to be successful in their path up that mountain?
Biggest thing for me is overcoming barriers to access to people. I think the greatest resource are those around you that have been successful wherever you want to go. And I think we talked about this a little bit last week. I don't have a problem going to our CEO and asking for some advice and some help and coaching. However, a person who's new in their career, who doesn't have meetings with the CEO frequently, might be really fearful of going to use that resource. So I think the biggest barrier is letting people know, and I think we do a good job of this at Titus, is everyone's accessible to you. You don't need to wait for someone to put an appointment on your calendar. Go seek out the things that you need, and you should feel the freedom to do that. So if you want to call Mike Kinsey because you think he's where you want to be in the future, go do that. Don't wait for him to reach out to you. So don't sit behind that. Give yourself access.
Yeah, I would add on to that. There's like several things that I want to say all at the same time. So
I'm glad I went first then, Chris, because I didn't want you to take my answer.
Yeah, I'm trying to do this in a way that makes sense when I'm thinking of like what holds people back. I think one, development is a full contact sport. So to Raina's point, just step out, in front and control your destiny. Don't have a mentor, have a boardroom of directors, right? That are behind you. Like I said, 5 to maybe 10% of companies are developing people. So what does that also mean? There's probably not a lot of leaders that you look up to that you're going to be 10th in line to get their time to talk about development, because people aren't doing it. So go out and ask. I think everybody's so busy, but they love to help people. So just really know that that will be well received. I think the other thing is, like, the obstacle is the way. Like, so many times people, you just have to get real to get right. Like, I think that's one thing I really love about our senior leadership team at Titus, is we understand that you just have to take things head on to move things in a positive direction. I think sometimes people approach goals and, coaching plans in a way that is almost too optimistic, where it's like, well, what's the real stuff? What's really holding us back? There's a reason why this picture is a guy looking up at all the stuff he has to do ahead, and he's not at the top celebrating, because it's just an ongoing thing. And I think once you lean into that, the leaders around you, they want to help you, right? So if you can get your direct report or the mentee that you're working with to just understand that, whoa, all of this learning just cascades over them, because now we're getting to the good stuff, and now we're having a real conversation. If people are just showing up and saying the things that people want to hear, but we're hiding what the real stuff is under the thing, it's just going to hold you back.
Yeah, this is where I believe so firmly that time is often the biggest barrier in a variety of different ways, of managers not making the time, direct reports feeling like they don't want to take the time from managers or to invest in certain areas. But also, we've seen so many people over the years in companies, they just don't have the touch points that are necessary to help people overcome barriers. There's so many organizations that have none or one performance review or coaching conversation a year.
Yep.
To me, it's like, gosh, it's like watching the game film after the game is over. I would much rather be coaching in the moment throughout that game versus looking back on all the things you did right and wrong. And so that's a really big piece. So from a barrier standpoint, I think there's some commonalities there, but from a resources standpoint, Raina, this is such your area of expertise. In what learning resources can you recommend as best kind of catch-all resources for people?
Well, I think the World Wide Web is everyone's oyster nowadays. I think we don't need to be so attached to, oh my gosh, to be grown, I have to spend so much money. There, I mean, even today's webinar, it's a free resource. There are so many free things out there that will help you do your job better. I think to the point of enough people don't take their own time out of their day. I just had this conversation today as a coaching moment. I said, you might not have time in your day to grow yourself. You have to make the time. You might have to set 30 minutes aside on a weekend or in an evening because your daily task list is so long and you really have to own your career. So go out there and find the things that are important to you. And if you find something that does take money to get you where you want to go, you can always, here we say like request it. We'll see if that's in the budget. And otherwise, if it's really important to you, pay for it yourself. I know for me, I wanted to coach desperately, and I found a great coach years ago. And just having that resource, it set me so much further ahead in my career. I was holding myself back, and this person was so honest to help me get where I wanted to go. So I think find a resource in your organization first and foremost. If you can't find a coach, find a mentor. That's one step in the right direction. Use all of the people around you. Don't be afraid of the ask. Own your career. Forge ahead. Use the internet to find something out there for you, because there are millions of resources. So there is no lack of items out there that can help grow you.
Yeah, the internet. That's something I haven't heard of, Raina. I'm gonna talk offline about that.
So you want to be on the line. That's
what
on
the line.
Yeah,
well, one of the big things that Chris, I see you do particularly well, and you had kind of alluded to it before, but you are a realist when you communicate with people and having the difficult conversations, but you have a great innate way of spinning things positively to people to be able to see the strength that they have internally. And so, one of the big barriers that people have is just kind of how down on themselves that they can get. But it can also become a resource if you can channel that into that positive self-talk. How do you inspire people in that way, or help them develop that as a skill set?
Wow. There's so much that goes into that. I think it is really, it can get hard, especially if somebody is meeting several challenges. I was taught a long time ago that everybody has a sign around their neck and it says, make me feel special, right? So I think it's your job as a leader to understand that while that is around their neck, they can't see it. And so you got to be the mirror to them in those moments. And so also back to what you had said earlier, I thought you touched on a really good thing. If you're having these conversations all the time, all of this stuff becomes less scary, because this is just what you do. I was at a EOS conference, and I had a leader ask me, like, how many times do you have a coaching conversation with your direct reports? I'm like, I don't even know. We coach each other all the time. And it's a two-way street, by the way. It's not me just, like they're giving me feedback as well. So I think when that's happening and somebody is down on themselves, and how do you spin that into the positive? It's again, I think, going back to that maxim that like the crucible that you're going through is what is going to be the foundation for your greatness, and just making them understand that it's okay, as long as now we're putting a plan together, right? We're learning from it. That's one of the biggest things I always ask. Okay, this is a tough time. Let me ask you this. Is there something that you're going to take from this, and it's going to become a chapter in your playbook for years to come, and help them identify what that is? And then I think that's taking them a step in the right direction. There's always something to be learned, and I think that's where you find the positivity.
This whole webinar is to help create simplicity for you, like the whole idea of having these 4 steps that we can lead through coaching. I think I also want to remove the fear of being the coach, because coaching happens in small moments. It doesn't have to be this formal process. There are opportunities every day when we speak to our people to help them grow. So it doesn't have to be this long process. And if you have enough touch points, it does become this culture, the culture of coaching that we're referring to. It just becomes these small moments of helping a person achieve greatness.
I love that, Rena. That's a really good segue into one of the last points
I was
here.
trying to segue us.
That was
so close
Well
on time.
done.
beautifully done. So when we look at the coaching skills, the items that we as leaders need to continue to focus on and work on, starting at the bottom with self-awareness. This is a piece where I know I've grown in this a lot more, especially using a tool like the predictive index and it being black and white in my face of what my strengths are as an individual, but that those exact same strengths can also be weaknesses of mine. And so when I look at things like extroversion, yeah, you can be motivating and you can communicate well with people on your team. However, you could be seen as maybe fake or too talkative, or there's always different areas for you to continue to self-assess and work on together. The one that, Chris, I think you do so insanely well is humble inquiry. And so it's one area that I would love to see growth in, but not sure if you have any comments there and how you can maybe grow that as a skill set, even though it is innate in certain people.
Yeah, so I have a very actionable thing that you can do for feedback, because I think too many times we kind of, whether we're meaning to or not, we kind of put somebody on the spot and we're like, hey, how did I do? And I think our natural instinct is to be like, oh, great, right? Because you're not trying to hurt somebody's feelings. So it's like, how premeditated can you be with this? So like, I'll go into a meeting. I've done this with you before, Mike, and I'll call you before and I'll say, hey, this is my intention. This is what I'm trying to do. Give me feedback on this specific thing, because this is how I want it to come across. Just having that conversation is showing the humility, and you're giving permission for the feedback. And now you're giving somebody time to really think about, okay, this is important to this person. I like them. I want to help them. And they've given me this space to be courageous because they want it and they've told me they want it. And now you're getting some really good stuff. So I think where I push my direct reports a lot is I think they're good at asking feedback. Be a little bit more premeditated with that feedback and you'll get even, better stuff to dig into for yourself.
Yeah. And to simplify this further, all humble inquiry is also being curious. I mean, coaching is about asking a lot of questions upon questions to dive deeper and deeper and deeper. But again, I mean, that moves us to surrendered listening, because when you're asking questions, that's the next thing we have to do as a leader, is make sure when we're asking the questions, we're not listening to respond.
Which is one of the first things I noticed about you, Raina. I'm like, she's actually listening to me. So I don't know if that's practiced or if that is, what that is. And I know for sure I need to practice in that too, but it ultimately leads up to the top of this pyramid of transformational feedback. And that's the feedback that helps everyone get better. And that's where I love what you were saying, Chris, is that is a complete two-way street.
Yep.
So I know we're almost up on time here, and we want to make sure that everybody that joined the webinar has an opportunity to take this a step further. And we're having an open coaching session. It's called Lead by Coaching. This is a 2-hour session. This has been hugely impactful to so many of our internal people as well as our partners. Of just, let's take this one more step further of what is coaching, how is it done, what makes it so powerful. And so if there's hiring managers, if there's leaders within your organization that you think you'd find this beneficial, scan the QR code. This is an opportunity to get 25% off. So this would be $150 for people to take this. And this is part of a larger, more of a certification when it comes to coaching that we do provide. And so we can teach you more about that. And if people want to take their leadership and their coaching to the next level, that's exactly what we're here for at Titus, to be able to support and provide you with as hopefully future partners of us as well. So that's it for the time together. Hopefully we do see you for Lead by Coaching, but otherwise, Raina Fryer, Chris Paris, just really appreciate you both and all the wisdom that you're able to provide today. And we'll definitely see you again on another conversation. But thanks for everybody for joining. and hopefully we see you soon.
Yeah, and go on
So-
the line, find us, go on the line to LinkedIn, because we're here to answer any questions that you might have. So happy to connect if you have some one-off questions or need some ideas on how to embed this further in the organization. We're all here for you, and we're all accessible through LinkedIn.
That's a really good point. So the last piece too is if you do have questions in regards to any of the learning that we have, you can contact us at learning@titustalent.com. And so that's a big piece that we want to be able to invest into you all as well. So thanks all. Looking forward to connecting soon.